I really liked what we shortly talked about last time, and that is what data skills does a product manager really need, right? Because I faced that myself. I think it depends a bit on the products that you're working on. It depends on the team structure that you're working in. It depends on the rest of the setup. But I think there are some basics that you kind of need. So I'd like to ask you first, like, as a data person, right? What do you expect a PM to be able to do?
I mean, I think you mentioned this, which is really more important to understand that there's no one size fits all. But I think the most important aspect would be you should really know what you need from the data side. Like, I mean, it shouldn't be I'll just, look at the dashboard, look at the insight, and then I'll understand how to use it. It would be really nice if proactively, at least you have an idea of, okay, what I'm trying to achieve by, requesting this dashboard, requesting this insight is I want some evidence, or I want to, make this decision a little bit more data driven, etc. So that baseline, of that sort of precursor, is super important, because that means you enter, or let's say we deliver something, you receive that with a priori knowledge of, okay, so this is the need and this is the sort of solution to that need. That's important, and that's a major piece of the puzzle where if data, I mean, honestly, product managers and product people just took some time to understand when we're making these requests, what we're really looking for are these kind of answers. Because, I mean, everybody loves data, and dashboards are pretty and graphs are nice, but any single graph will have multiple messages. It'll be the main thing that you look at and go like, oh, okay, we're doing poorly in a churn metric, or we're doing better in this particular feature. But I think that's where we always have this main use case that we're trying to achieve with this guy. And so like that would be the most important thing. So to give you an example, there's different kind of graphs. And so if you're looking for if you're trying to understand the distribution of your users, there's a specific type of graph. And so looking at a simple bar chart with this, again, mine doesn't really help you, right? Because you're seeing one user cohort over the other, but you're not really understanding that all of these then comprise a particular sample set. And so it's kind of these things where representation matters a lot, and this is why visualization is one of the key pieces in data. But I would start there, and then I think there's more aspects you can go into. A little bit of statistics would always help. So when we talk about outliers, when we talk about, we just take the mean median, I think it's completely okay to ask, why did we choose the median over the mean? I don't think I think a lot of people think that's a stupid question, but that's completely fair question to ask, why we would take one statistical measure over another statistical measure. So things like that.
Yeah, I think there's two really nice things that you touched upon there. So I think one thing that I see with a lot of PMs is that we've been talking so long about how we should be data driven, right? There's not one PM, there's not one job description for a PM where it's like, you make data driven decisions and blah, blah, blah. So we kind of feel like we have to say that, of course, we've been doing that for a very long time, right? And everybody is scared to admit that they don't really know. And what I see whenever I start working with new PMs, some of them are excellent, right? But a lot of them are just kind of staring at a lot of dashboards or just requesting a lot of data from their data colleagues. But then they get this stuff, they look at it, and they don't really know what to do with it, right? This is like, I feel like almost 90% of the time when I work with people that I see, they have like 100 dashboards, but they don't really look at them, because at the end, they can't really get any insights. So I think the stupid question that you said, like, why are we picking the median over the mean, stuff like that, we should normalize that it's okay to ask these questions, right? Yep. So we should also, and this hangs together with curiosity and critical thought. So not just saying, okay, this guy is the pro, he says this, but asking why, understanding why, because you're the person who has the context as the PM, right? You're the one making the request. And another thing I've noticed is, especially when we have a data team, product managers there comes this kind of service agent relationship somehow, where product managers just go, give me this answer, give me this answer, give me this answer. And it becomes really fun to make like a lot of requests. But in fact, it's very easy to ask questions, but it's very hard to ask the right questions, right? So I think it's also a skill to understand what are really the right questions to ask? I think this is almost the most important skill to master as a PM, right? Even if you dig through data yourself or if you have somebody to support you. So it's a little bit those things. Firstly, you're not stupid if you don't know how to work with data. We should be more honest about it. I feel like a lot of people don't, but they pretend that they do. And just train yourself and understanding what are the right questions to ask, where do you need to dig, and what is maybe not so relevant.
Because you mentioned this transactional relationship, what's essential is that we can't narrate or we can't essentially dictate this dynamic because, as you mentioned, we are inundated with requests, right? And this is where the backlog comes in, where I think a product team assumes that when they make a request, as small as it is, it's like a one of one, and then we just take our sweet time, and when we deliver, we're already late. But it's like one of n. Because it's one of n, we treat it with the same transactional. Okay, let's just get it out of the door. And most often, when I speak to product managers and when I speak to the data teams, the disconnect is that the product managers say, I mean, they deliver. It's not like they don't deliver. They deliver exactly the insights and the dashboards I need. The problem is they believe that delivery is the end of that transaction. And for me, it's sort of the beginning of that conversation. Like, that's great. Now I have data to back my insight, but let's explore why that number went down. And that just doesn't exist in the dynamic.
And that's crazy, right? Because for me, I work often without data people because I work with very small startups and scale-ups, sometimes with data people, but sometimes also without, which I'm limited, right, in what I can do. I can do basic stuff. I know there's some simple product analytics tools that I like that I can work with, and I can pull some stuff out. But I always feel like, okay, if I had a proper data person by my side, I could extract more.
Right.
But I'm here, right? I can do something. I can get somewhere, and it has to be enough in this kind of setup. But it does also teach me to. I run a report, I build a funnel, I check, and then to ask follow-up questions because it's me on my own kind of doing this research.
Sure.
And so it does help to kind of be on your own for a while, right? Because you start thinking that way. It becomes not as in request is fulfilled, end of stuff, end of story. But you get into this loop of saying, okay, but why is it happening? Can I go more granular? Should I segment? Is it different if I slice my users into segments? What happens if I do this, right? If you have that curiosity, which I think is the main thing that matters, you will get there. Maybe also when you work with a data team, it's like you've made the request, then you got the dashboard, you have a follow-up question, but you have to open a ticket again and wait another month.
Exactly.
So
if you think about these two camps of product and data, there's this imbalance because there's a lot of ownership on the product side, right? Because they're driving this thing. So ownership is high. Capability and access to tools is very low, right? So you need to drive something and be data-driven, and you're driving that, but your capabilities are so low. It's the flip side on the data camp, right? They have access to tools, and we have a lot more capability in terms of implementing these pipelines, but ownership is so low. And so it only makes sense if the two of us actually get together and work together, like you said, because otherwise one by itself will never be optimal, right? Because for us, it's like, this is just one other request. I don't even understand where it fits into the big piece. For the product managers, I think they understand the bigger piece, but implementation is a nightmare. Like you mentioned, I can drive it, but I really don't have control over it because I make a ticket and I just bug them every once in a while to be like, are we still on track? So this imbalance is, it exists in many parts of the organization, but because product and data work so closely together, and I think designers, for example, are also in this piece. And so if we think about a simple feature roadmap, discovery happens at the very beginning, right? And usually discovery has some form of data, which is usually opinions, thoughts, some evidence maybe, followed by you give it to a designer, and a designer sort of half-bakes a frame or a mock-up. And at that point, you say, okay, now maybe we need to talk to the data guys and start getting an analytics and plugging in the pipelines. And I think for us, it's already too late, right? Because you've kind of, as mentioned, you half baked the feature. So have you experienced this where it would help if the data person was in the room during discovery?
Yeah. So I work, as said, mainly with like smaller startup scale-ups where things are less waterfally. I think what you described, I've seen this too. I've seen this in one company that I worked at recently that was like 1,500 people, so really big, or like 200 plus. Then you get really almost this waterfally stuff of like, okay, here, now we have a UX research team that does discovery. Then it's handed over to the PM, and then it comes a designer, and it's all like these chunks of deliverables. And now check, we've met this gate, and now comes the next. But the companies that I work with, we don't work this way at all, actually. So I actually usually work with product trios, which is not my invention, but it's something that Teresa Torres talks about quite a lot. So the discovery work I do is always with an engineer and a designer in it. I also had the pleasure of working with one scale-up with an extremely strong data team, like really strong data people. Why were they strong? I assume everybody who's a data scientist is good at data science, but also very much questioning how can I bring value to the products, right? Not at all this service mentality, but like the product managers could do some data, and the data people were thinking like product managers. And this was wonderful, right? And the data people were part of the product trio, so they were also part of understanding the opportunity space, and which helps, right? Because when I map the opportunity space, I back it up with data. So I always start with qualitative stuff. So I start by talking to customers, so I kind of understand, okay, this might be important. But then I dig into the data and I see, okay, what opportunities are at the moment appear to be more important in our product. So I look for success gaps, where I see big drop-offs, or which features are being used a lot, or which are being used by a lot of people, but they don't come back to it, right? So I'm just looking for these kind of things. If you have a data person in the mix for that, it becomes a lot more powerful. It helps you also set better success metrics, think about tracking from the beginning. So I've had the pleasure of working in such teams that were extremely cross-functional, but that's also a type of organization where that works, and a type of person where that works, right? Because these were also data people. Like, developers don't want to be code monkeys, right? They also didn't want to be data delivery services. They also want to be involved in this part. And for me, that's an absolute dream to work in a setup like that.
It's interesting you mentioned that, because I think that's one of the learnings I also learned because I go to product conferences and I go to data conferences, and the team is it's just different, because product people, as you say, they would love to know data, but just generally the role being a bit more vocal and people oriented, they're more open to like, okay, tell me about this graph. I have no clue what's happening here. And I think for data people, because the role it's not a code monkey, but we like not being, because context switching hurts, right? So we like not being disrupted every day by a completely different request than just, focusing on something. As a developer, I completely understand the need for focus. So usually there is a lot of resistance to being, okay, now I need to understand the product that, my piece is going into. For us, there's also a big room to grow there, because it's and I think designers are a good example. When you understand exactly the user journey based on what you're designing, and you see the feedback coming in, that sort of feedback loop is much more direct than, someone saying, I don't really like this particular pipeline. Because
exactly,
I think that's the piece we're missing, where we design things that we think live in a vacuum. It's just something but if it's driving a decision, and if it's driving a feature, it's directly impacting the consumer. And that's honestly just awareness that changes the way we start designing things, right? And what are ways that we can not educate, but at least make this awareness spectrum grow, where developers can understand, so when the product teams make this request, what's going to change in the product is this, whether it's the behavior or the feature. And that honestly gives you some kind of ownership, right? Because you're now designing a piece of the puzzle that consumer will get impacted by. How do you think we should tackle that? How we can tackle that?
So I think product trios are a really good way to do it, right? So there used to be this way of thinking that the problem space belongs to the product manager and the solution space belongs to developer, right? And this is quite outdated because there is no such cut, right? If we do it properly, discovery flows into the delivery, and delivery is kind of a part of validation and goes back into discovery. It's kind of this intertwined loop. It's not like discovery finished, now delivery, if you do it right? If you want to actually build a product that brings value to customers. So I really like this idea of bringing engineers into the discovery process. And I could see that working for data people too, right? So understanding the bigger picture and saying, hey, this is the outcome we're trying to drive. This is what we're trying to do. These are a few avenues that we see, some opportunities that we see that could do that. Now we're going to together try to figure out which one is the one to go. You'll also be involved in talking to customers, right? Like if we're going to be customer centric, why should not everybody be able to listen to customers, or at least be involved? I do this a lot. I do a lot of customer interviews, and in most cases, they don't mind when there's a lot of people listening in, right? I've never had somebody say, "Oh my God, there's too many people sitting in. This is freaking me out." It might happen sometimes, but it hasn't happened to me yet. And so I think, to me, that is the solution, right? Involving people more, because if people are not involved in the problem space or in the context, you can't expect them to understand it, right? And you cannot expect them to make the best decisions. They will make a decision with the information they have. They will need you to specify all the information, the context perfectly, which you will fail to do. And we know this. We know this also from development processes. We know all of this. So I think that is the way forward, right? And that works with also people with the right mindset and people who feel like that. To me, if I were a data analyst, I would have much more fun if I was given this context than if I were to sit there and just work through service requests without understanding the context or even understanding the strategy behind it.
But when you say product trio, like, are these, let's say, designers or data engineers or analysts, are they interchangeable, or are they a unit that then sticks through the length of the project?
So they're a unit. So you have a team that is responsible to drive a specific outcome. So you might have multiple trios, or you might have one, depends how big your company is and how big your product is. So you might have a team that focuses on one thing. Let's say this team focuses on improving customer activation. We want more people to activate. And they have a product outcome that fits to that. And then there's trio, so at least 3, but it can even be bigger. It can be 4, 5, 6 people, right? It doesn't have to be just a trio. The trio is the minimum, who are focused on trying to figure out what is the best way for us to drive that outcome. So what I like about it, it is very outcome oriented. Step away from the service agent kind of mentality, right? Like it's completely the other way around. And it's much more customer centric. So everybody's brought close. And I think that's what helps you make the right decisions, right? And I think also having the eyes of a data person in early, for me, for sure, when I do an opportune solution tree and I piece it together, I do a decent enough job, right? But I think like if I had somebody sitting there who understood it better, because sometimes I do look at reports and I think, this doesn't quite make sense. It's like,
I think like more than understanding it better, I think the difference is we just have knowledge of more tools that would be, beneficial. What's interesting about the thing you mentioned is, I envision being part of that trio, and what's accidental or intentional is because it's outcome oriented for that person. There's still a lot of focus, right? Because you're not entertaining requests from another unit, I assume, right? So you're shielded off.
You could be, right? If that would be the setup of the organization, if that would, I think that would work. That it's kind of like a Scrum team, but it's not, right? So there's just a unit dedicated to this one problem or this one outcome, and dedicated to that, and therefore also getting this ownership that you talk about. Because I imagine also you just get in a lot of kind of almost random requests from all sides, and there's no pattern, right? You just every day you have to do a different dashboard. There's something in the ticket why it makes sense, but it's very hard, I think, to do a great job in this kind of setup.
A lot of times what happens is, at least with analysts, you don't get you do get like random requests, but at least you understand the purpose. Like someone tells you, this is what I want to see. With data science, it gets even more vague because it's a open it's an open-ended wizard ball solution, right? So now people just say, hey, can you just make something? And now you're stranded, like, I don't know where this is going. I don't know what you want. And so it would be interesting to also see, and that's why I asked the interchangeable question, because like it can completely be that like the unit you start with is not the unit you end with, right? Like the unit you start with can be, well, I need a data analyst because there's a bunch of historical data that I need to process. But then you graduate to okay, now I understand. We're moving forward with this feature, and we're getting to a point where we're getting user analytics data. But now it's a very open-ended problem. Like, what do I do with this analytics data? Like, what can I model? And so you can swap out the analyst for a scientist there, right? Because at that point, the analyst is kind of no longer relevant, because now the data that's coming in, you need to come up with a model that says, oh, so if we may build this feature, stickiness was going to go up because this is what the data is saying. And so product management is very different for AI, for data science. How do you like navigate that if you're dealing with something that you've never done before, you've never built before, and the data science team is, yeah.
So I see myself as a customer in this case, right? So when I interview a customer as a product manager, what I'm really looking for is their use case. I want to know, what are you trying to do? So that's the context, right? So rather than painting the solution, I think, I don't know, right? I'll just say, this is kind of where I'm trying to get to. Can you help me get there, right? This is the goal I'm trying to achieve. And I just try to be as clear as possible as where this journey is supposed to go for me, and involve them into figuring out what is the best way to get there. Now, I must say, with most companies I work with, there's mainly data analysts, data scientists, mainly used to build external facing products, not so much internally. I haven't seen that so much. Same with AI, mainly as part of the external. In one company, it was internal. And there I did exactly this, right? I just explained, this is my use case. This is where I'm trying to get help, right?
Yeah.
And I think I just treat myself as a customer in this case, and that worked out fine.
I think so. I think even that, I think, wouldn't hurt as much as figure it out, because a lot, like, and the external requests again don't really come with, you mentioned user feedback, right? So if at the very least we understand what the user wants, then it's clear what we want to build, right? And so I think that's the missing piece of the puzzle, where let's say you build a ride sharing app. You have a very simple call one ride app, or the app just, you can call one type of ride and that's all it does. The good thing is now you want to build more features, which is where then our data science comes in. But the user analytics data is just one piece of the puzzle. Like, the other piece is, what kind of features do the users actually want? Like, do they want more card types? I think you're right. Like, that piece would help a lot, because it would direct us, because we're in this like puzzle space of a million Legos, and you're like, oh, just build anything. You're like,
okay. Yeah. So I mainly also work with B2B SaaS companies that don't have a wealth of user data, right? So there's not many amazing models you can build. So I rely a lot on qualitative insights as well. So I dig through the data to see where are people dropping off, where is friction, whatever. But to figure out what are people looking for, or what should I improve, I literally ask questions, which is, for me, with low numbers environments, it's the best way to do it. So I have a lot of interviews. I do 1-question surveys that ask, is this good? Do you like it? So I rely on that much more than I need to use a data scientist to build me a fancy model, because there's just not enough data to go off in the first place.
But I mean, the fun part is you can continue doing that and just quantify that, right? So instead of saying, now, is this good? You can say, just on a scale of 0 to 5, tell me how you liked it. And I would always encourage that too, because at the very least, when you start quantifying it, now you have, like, you could put it on an Excel sheet, right? And you would see a pattern that you wouldn't see when you're just recording these, let's say, answers. And so I think it's tricky for us, right? Because we come from quite technical backgrounds, where something simple is synonymous with not good enough, because you don't want to build something on Excel and say, that's but it's like, it's a back and forth where when you start with a very small thing, don't have a lot of data, it's completely fine to do an MVP on any BI tool that just shows you which direction to go.
You can do much less than an MVP, right? Actually, like the term MVP is such a difficult one. So many people get very upset about the term MVP. But basically, you don't need a lot of data or a very high confidence level if you're going to do something very small that is very reversible, right? That teaches you some stuff. So you can just have a feature stub, or you could just have something really little to kind of take you that one step further. As said, in the environments that I work in, it's never going to be perfect. I think never research is going to be perfect, right? So you just kind of work with what you have and you build up from there, right? And you kind of keep increasing the cost or the complexity of your tests as you learn more. So I keep it simple, and then I increase as I go along. And that's why qualitative insights work a lot. And then I just back it up with what I have, what I see in product analytics tools or in the tools that I have. The CRM database, I use that also for insights, right? So I check what kind of customers do we have now. So there's a variety of tools where I can gather insights, and the magic comes when I have to plot all of that together, right? So I have all of these different sources. I have these qualitative insights. I have these surveys. I have product analytics. I have a CRM, and I have to kind of extract some insights and decide the right stuff based on all of that. That's where the magic happens.